Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are, and so much love to each and every one of you. I'm so glad you've joined me tonight for part 3 of our story, and it's such a special story tonight because we're all going to be learning a little bit about the Wendigo, and it's something I don't really know very much about, so it really is exciting to hear of someone who's had an incredible encounter like this. So we're getting to the exciting, really punchy parts, and so I'm so glad you've joined me. But if you've missed out part 1 and you've missed out part 2, really go back to the beginning because you want to hear the story, the whole story, because just a bit of a story is never the same thing, is it? You want to hear the whole story, the characters, you want to be able to get into the feeling of the story so that you can be there as if you yourself are encountering the Wendigo. And let's continue with part 3 of our story. If someone did push her down the staircase, which personally I highly doubt, it was most certainly not me. Of course I was jealous with her. I mean, why wouldn't I be? It was a natural human instinct and reaction to feel like that. I mean, what ballerina doesn't want to dance the lead role in Swan Lake? I so badly wanted to play that part. But I'd never harm someone else for my own gain. The very idea is preposterous. Ironically, a single shoe was lying at the bottom of that staircase where Rosa had fallen. My uncle believed she'd tripped over that. And even if you're a ballet dancer and you're bladdered, my guess is your coordination goes very badly awry. I know, I'm so sorry, Sylvia. I heard all about it, I said emphatically. Believe me, life can be a bitch. I should know about it, as mine is completely derailed, thanks to my late husband. Well, getting back to my story, Jennifer. Let's get back to it, because I want to get it over and done with, because the less I say about the Wendigo, the better. As you can appreciate, my dear, I was in a very bad place in my life, much like you are now. And the Wendigo preys on human vulnerability and fear, smells it from miles away. He's drawn to the smell, rather like a shark is to blood. I remember when I got to Stanhope Hall, the first thing I did was to gravitate towards the trees. It was within the wooded sanctuary among the indigenous wildlife. I found much comfort. But one day something happened to me that shook me to the core. It was absolutely extraordinary. There are no words. I was taking a casual stroll in the wood grove, not far from here, actually, she said, pointing towards the window, where I could see the distant silhouettes of the tall, lofty trees that spread out into a sizable sylvan. It had begun like any other day, as you would expect, when I was about to have an encounter that would make me question all I thought I knew about the fabric of our reality. Much like you, I believed that predators out there were mountain lions, wolves, bears, that kind of thing. But I was to learn there was something out there infinitely more intimidating, infinitely more menacious and sinister. It was autumn, and the leaves from some of the oaks in the wood grove had fallen onto the ground, so they looked rather menacing stripped of their leaves, as if their gnarled boughs were reaching out to grab me. But I gave them no attention. When I walked, I'd empty my mind into a meditational kind of trance-like state, where I could just let go of all my troubled thoughts, so that all the hurtful episodes of recent tumultuous events I could let go of, rather like a balloon on the wind, if you know what I mean. It was a prepossessing day. The gossamer sunlight pirouetted through all the trees. It was diaphanous, I must say. There was a cool breeze that was blowing, causing the leaves on the woodland duff to rustle almost musically. I was enjoying my walk in nature, I really was, when I heard the pronounced thudding sound of footsteps pounding the ground, moving behind me. They were relatively light, not heavy. My first thought was my uncle had decided to join me for a walk, and that thought pleased me greatly. I had become incredibly close to my uncle. He'd saved me from the likes of Theodore, and so it had solidified our friendship. He became like a second father to me, and I was likewise the daughter he and his wife never had. "Uncle Teddy, is that you? Uncle Teddy? Uncle Teddy?" I asked, turning around to look behind me. Uncle Teddy, is that you? For a moment I could swear I heard a sinister chuckling sound, as if someone was mocking me. Ha ha ha! Ha ha ha! With a macabre kind of humour, if you like, as if enjoying my unease. I told myself I'd imagined the laughter, but even so the sound made every fibre of my being shudder. I thought the whispering sound of the wind had fabricated in my mind an illusory laughter that wasn't actually there. It's amazing how inventive our imaginations can be, and I thought mine was just taunting me. I honestly don't know how to explain this to you, Jennifer, but the temperature of the woodland oasis had exponentially changed as profoundly as if I had turned a light switch on and off. It felt as if the woodgrove had not only been stripped of all its leaves, but also of the refuge it usually offered me as a safe sanctuary. That had gone as well. I felt as naked and afraid as I think Adam and Eve did in the Garden of Eden. I suddenly felt conspicuously vulnerable, and I had the most awful clawing sense that I was being watched by a pair of malevolent eyes that bored into the back of my skull. I knew then unequivocally that something or someone was watching me. I stood there in the woodgrove with prickles trickling down my spine, as I cautiously scanned the trees to see if I could see anything surreptitiously moving behind the trunks, hiding directly in my mist. But nothing was there. But that intense foreboding sense that something was watching me, and I was very much not alone, was overwhelming and incredibly discomposing. I was overcome with a bodeful, impending sense of dread. I noticed that everything had become unnaturally quiet. I became incredibly conscious of my own breathing. Even the wind had died down. Everything had become airily spooky. And that was when I heard the voice. It was the voice of Rosa, the girl who claimed I pushed her down the stairs at the ballet. My first thought was, what was she doing out here, so close to the Canadian border, here at Stanhope Hall? How could she even have found me? Why did she know that I was even here? Jennifer! Jennifer, it's me! Jennifer, it's me! I'm sorry, Jennifer, I'm sorry! As you can imagine, I stood there, almost frozen to the spot. I was so astonished, wondering if I was going stark raving mad. Now, this really was my imagination playing tricks on me, I thought. The woman who claimed I had crippled her was now talking to me in our woodgrove. And what on earth was she doing here? How did she find her way to Stanhope Hall? I decided maybe she'd traced me to Stanhope Hall for some reason, and my uncle told her that I'd gone into the woods for a walk. Otherwise, how could she know I was here? I marvelled that she had managed to find me, given my uncle had really covered my tracks superbly. But my heart lifted exponentially when I heard her saying I'm sorry because she was taking responsibility for what she'd done, I thought. Maybe it would mean I could return back to England, resume my ballet career, with that threat of danger hanging over my life, no longer a pliant any more. So naturally my heart began to skip with a brand new hope. "Where are you?" I called out to her. "Where are you, Rosa?" "I'm here," came the voice. "I'm here." I wanted to believe with all my heart, Jennifer, that Rosa had come to Stanhope Hall, looking for me to make amends. I failed to consider the fact that Rosa was crippled now. It would have been physically impossible in her condition to walk down that rather rocky woodland trail, navigating her way through all that thick scrub. As I moved towards the voice, I realized that even though it sounded like Rosa, something was distinctly off. I couldn't decide what it was, but I heard a very powerful voice thunder suddenly into my head. A very powerful voice. I don't know how to explain it. "Don't go any closer. It's a trick. If you get any closer, he'll kill you." The voice was so commanding that I began to run away from the woodgrove as fast as I could, wondering where the authoritative voice came from. But I knew unequivocally in that moment that that voice had saved my life, and that the voice of Rosa had indeed been a trick. So I wondered if it was the voice of James Stanhope. Now I will tell you all about that man in a minute, but let me get back to my story. So I glanced briefly over my shoulders, and I saw the hideous gnarled silhouette of the Wendigo. I could not believe what I was seeing. Now I really thought I was losing it. Things like that just didn't exist, and I'd never heard of the Wendigo before, so I didn't know what I was looking at. But this thing was a hideous walking skeleton, with hoof for feet and skin the colour of white saplings. It had a sunken pair of hollows for eyes, and was covered with blood that it was drooling out of its open jaw. And as I ran, he let out a furious scream. He knew I had narrowly escaped his clutches. I knew then that the Wendigo was not just a legend, after I was told all about it. It's a cannibalistic human-like spirit that feeds on those of us that have found ourselves in a very vulnerable, precarious place in our lives. It loves the taste of fear and vulnerability, and it's hungrily drawn to people like you and me that have lost absolutely everything. It thrives on the taste of our hopelessness. It can't get enough of the taste of human despair and despondency, which it can smell for miles away. The Wendigo does not stay in one location all the time. It wanders around and around all over the place, feeding on those who have flatlined in their lives from their own grievous despair. And those people end up going missing, and people wondered what became of them. For the Wendigo will leave behind no trail, no sign that he was ever there, for he is a master of deception and trickery, and is able to successfully cloak himself, I'm afraid. Lord Stanhope's oldest son, James, fell victim to the Wendigo. Do you remember that old nursery rhyme? Fee, fi, fo, thum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread. I nodded. Yes, I do remember having a recollection of that nursery rhyme, but what has that got to do with a Wendigo? Everything, and a whole lot as it happens. As I keep telling you, Jennifer, dear, sometimes even nursery rhymes are rooted from true stories. Think about the giant in the children's nursery rhyme. He smells the blood of an Englishman, doesn't he? That's what gets him going. Well, when it comes to the Wendigo, he smells our despair and hopelessness, and it's like a drug to him. He's addicted to that smell. So what happened to Lord Stanhope's oldest son? I asked curiously. He was in a dark, hopeless place that you find yourself in now, my dear, where you've experienced the pain of an insidious betrayal on your husband's part. I was also in that place after I lost my life in England. This, my dear Jennifer, was betrayal of the very worst kind. The kind of betrayal that is rubbed right under your nose so that not for a moment can you be allowed to even forget about it. James was madly, passionately in love with a fair maiden called Genevieve Vernsby, who was his betrothed. But he found out that his own younger brother Lucan had stolen his betrothed's affections, and she no longer wanted to be with him, but with his brother instead. Once Genevieve learned that the family inheritance was to be equally divided between the two sons, she made a beeline for James's younger brother. Lucan was the better-looking of the pair, so she got her claws into him instead. When a family member steals away from you the woman you love, how do you ever get over something like that, Jennifer? James believed Genevieve was the love of his life. He now had lost her forever. Needless to say, he found himself in a dark night of the soul kind of place, driven to the depths of his own despair. For not only had his brother ruthlessly stabbed him in the back, but the woman he loved so desperately had turned her affection towards Lucan. One day James went for a walk in the wood grove. He never returned. Rumours abounded that he had encountered the Wendigo. The Stanhope family invited a Native American medicine man to their home to perform some kind of magic ritual, to try and find out what had become of their precious son. They were told that the Wendigo had fed off his flesh. My uncle believed the Wendigo had called out to him in the voice of his beloved, and he in his hopeless distress went running towards that voice, like a lamb to the slaughter, and was savagely devoured by the Wendigo, because of his distraught emotions, their delicious food to the savage beast. Not only just our physical flesh, it's the energy we're giving off, you see. That's too dreadful. How could Lucan have done that to his own brother? I said. Did he have no moral compass whatsoever? I don't care if he was hopelessly in love with James's betrothed. There's some things you don't do. You're right about that, Jennifer. By all accounts, both men were beguiled by Genevieve. They should have known better about a girl like that. He was looking to feather her own nest. She didn't love either of the Stanhope brothers. You see, my dear Jennifer, a beautiful woman can be a man's most poisonous arrow, for when she pierces his heart, well, there's not a lot you can do about it, is there? Even the Holy Book warns about such things, does it not? What does it say? My son, don't be beguiled by a woman of ill repute, for she will lead you to the grave. Genevieve was about as fickle as they come. She spat out Lucan Stanhope like old chewing gum. She had tired of him, you see. She chose to marry another very affluent gentleman of great means, whose prosperous family boasted a grander, more substantial fortune than the Stanhopes. She was a glutton for all she could get. No wise man would be foolish enough to marry a lady like that, unless they wanted to seal their own fate. You know the Stanhope family. They ended up losing a son to the Wendigo, and the second son never got over what he'd done to his own brother, or for the feeble love of a very unreliable woman, who was not worthy of the devoted attentions of either of those young men. Genevieve might have been fair on the outside, but she was emotionally barren, desolate, devoid of any feeling, like a destitute wilderness where nothing beautiful will ever grow. It would seem the wealthy man she married was reported to being completely miserable in his marriage with her. "Why would you be sad?" he was asked. "You're married to the most beautiful woman in these parts." He would scoff and say, "Beauty is only skin deep. When I look at my wife, I see a monster, not the pretty girl I thought I married. I can't believe that I was ever beguiled by her charms." 2 years after he married that woman, he hung himself in a closet. She inherited his vast fortune, becoming a very wealthy young lady indeed. So she got what she wanted in the end. And as bizarre as it sounds, maybe the younger Stanhope brother Lucan had a lucky escape. I mean, Genevieve sounds rather like a honey trap. You think you found a diamond, and you realize that this beguiling jewel turned out to be dust in your hands. Well, it still happens today, doesn't it? Women like that, trapping men, left, right and centre. You hear about it all the time. Sylvia nodded. I noticed her tea had grown cold, and her hands had ceased their shaking. She stared at me through her blue eyes, and her voice suddenly softened. You do understand, dear, why I'm duly concerned about your current emotional state. Because a Wendigo will smell your distress like an ambulance siren, and it'll automatically be drawn to you. I'm not saying there is a Wendigo around here, but you can never be too sure. There is so much wilderness outside our door. There are things in the woods that you need to be wary about. The Wendigo is one of them. I was one of the lucky ones. I managed to escape his grasp. Are you saying that I shouldn't go out into the woods at all? No, I'm saying nothing of the kind, my dear. That would be dreadful if you didn't go out there, said Sylvia, giving me an encouraging nudge. On the contrary, you do need to walk within the trees to find your own healing. They helped me, as they will help you, I'm most sure. People always gravitate towards nature when they need to self-heal. And it worked for me, as it will doubtlessly work for you. But you need your wits about you, dear. You need to be guarded, given your vulnerable emotional state. You need to be aware that a creature like the Wendigo is not just a Native American legend. It's a cannibalistic, supernatural spirit that wanders through desolate areas of wilderness, seeking out the energy of those who have lost their way, preying on the vulnerable. And given you are in that very dark place, you are very, very susceptible to a creature like that, just like I was back then. So as I was saying, my dear, I felt I had to warn you about this. I couldn't abide you falling victim to the Wendigo, like Jane Stanhope did all those years ago. Sometimes I wonder if his spirit is wandering the woods, and whether it was his voice I heard that warned me about the Wendigo, and whether he saved my life that grueling, inauspicious day, when I came face to face with the most monstrous beast I have ever seen. As Native American legend suggests, it's almost impossible to outwit the Wendigo, and the only thing that can destroy him is fire. That's what I'm told, anyway. It's an extraordinary tale, Sylvia, I said. What does Erwin think about all this? I assume he knows about it. Oh, Erwin knows all about it, my dear, said Sylvia, grimacing. The problem is he thinks, like so many people do, that stuff like this is nonsense. He believes the Wendigo is just a creature of legend and doesn't exist in our modern-day world. He doesn't take the story of my strange encounter remotely seriously. He thinks I was in a very bad place at the time, and that my imagination was in overdrive. But it wasn't. I remember very clearly what I saw. He doesn't think James Stanhope was torn to shreds by a Wendigo. He thinks the man met his end at the hands of a hungry mountain lion. But I know very differently, said Sylvia. I knew that poor man was torn to shreds by a Wendigo, for not even a tag of skin was recovered at the time. He simply vanished into thin air. And the Native American medicine man who conjured up his spells could see James Stanhope being devoured by the Wendigo. He was in no doubt that is what had killed the poor man. Sylvia and I became fast friends. We grew incredibly close. But when she told me her extraordinary story about the Wendigo, I honestly did not know what to make of it. To my sound mind, the suggestion of a cannibalistic spirit wandering the woods seemed preposterous. But Sylvia spoke about the Wendigo with a doubtless certitude, and she knew unequivocally that she'd seen the beast. But could she have been mistaken, I wondered? The imagination can be a powerful tool, and maybe her experience was just that, a fabrication in her own head that felt incredibly real. When I spoke to Erwin about the matter, he waved his arms up in the air and said, "My mother is getting on in age, Jennifer. I think she believed she saw the Wendigo, but just humour her, will you? I assure you, there is no such thing in our reality. You have absolutely nothing to worry about. You can walk in those woods and not concern yourself about a thing." "But how can you be sure?" I asked him. "Supposing it is true?" He raised a brow and let out a laugh. "It's just a legend, Jennifer. That's all it is. But I assure you, the only danger you might face here at Stanhope Hall is an encounter with a very bad-tempered bear or an aggressive mountain lion. But no supernatural spirit is after your blood. I can assure you of that." I wanted to believe Erwin was right, but something inside me told me he was horribly wrong, and that there might be some truth to the legends of the Wendigo. And if a bizarre creature like that existed, I needed to be on my guard. I decided privately to myself that I just would not be walking through the trees in my current emotional state, lest that the Wendigo would smell out my blood, that of late had rendered me emotionally weak and overawed by the duplicitous things my husband had done. Instead, I would delight my senses in intrigue as best as I could, to unload the heavy burdens that had begun to take precedence in my thoughts of late, and brought within my heart great feelings of hopelessness. I knew the walks in nature that my heart hungered for with a ravenous, insatiable, unquenchable appetite was due to the intrinsic need for myself to self-heal, and I needed to do these walks alone. I decided to walk in the meadows with Sylvia's two devoted dogs at my side, Soldier and Sapphire. The dogs were enormously large, resembling huskies. They would have overshadowed any wolverine by their vast size, and intimidated any likely predator. So how could I not be safe in this vast wild wilderness? The dogs remained stoically at my side, as they solemnly lifted up the scents buried beneath the earthen soil on their noses, for their discerning astuteness missed nothing on the wind. The crystalline sky promisingly boasted not a cotton candy cloud in sight, and the fragrant fresh smells of the alpine flowers tickled my nose with much pleasure. Once we had descended down the hill, I found myself on a flattened plateau of land, where tossed-up earthen soil, apparently recently loosened, and jutting out from the depths were jagged rocks that rather reminded me of teeth, and beyond the freshly dug-up soil was a grove of tall, lofty trees, where a tall sign presented itself to my attention. It read, "The Stanhope Trail." I observed in between the trees a generously wide open trail, covered in a plethora of leaf litter. It was designed for walkers and horse riders alike. This was the trail Sylvia had taken that inauspicious day, when she had encountered the Wendigo. It was the same foreboding place where James Stanhope had disappeared off the face of the earth, never to be seen or heard from again. These stark reminders stilled the apprehensive thoughts that jolted around my head like a car on a precariously rocky road. I stared down at the long trail, and an incongruous longing that I cannot explain overcame me, and I could not walk away. It was as if the forest was beckoning to me, as if I was being artfully lured into those woods. "Don't go there," I told myself, but a softer, persistent voice burned within me, persuading me to do otherwise, and the dogs delighted in my change of heart. So they eagerly dashed down the trail, their tails wagging profusely, their noses pinned to the ground. I think they were glad to escape the heat of the day, for the woodgrove offered a sanctuary of generous shade. Little did I realize that a Machiavellian, insidious power, beyond my control, would clandestinely be at work to furtively inveigle me into the heart of that woodgrove, with a gentle, very cunning inner coaxing that was coated with a honeyed enticement that I simply could not resist. It was almost as if I was being magnetically drawn into the woods. The lofty trees grew together in ubiquitous tight clusters, blotting out the transfixing views of the sky, especially during the summer months when the trees were abundant with new leaves and thick with foliage. I had learnt living out here at Stanhope Hall, with the exquisite tangerine sunsets I would watch every evening, with the pearly moon soon to follow. All this peppered my experience of the natural world with a mysterious mystique and a blissful tranquillity, the kind of serenity I would willingly wager most outsiders would never dream possible, that is only ever seen in the brushstrokes of surrealists and the verses of great poets. As I moved through the rustling trees, the gentle ambience of the grove was welcome and warm, as glittering insects danced through prisms of sunlight, and verdant shrubs and ferns resplendently bedecked the bluff in their viridescent overcoats. I kicked up the soft earth with my boots and trampled the marsh, which was a very satisfying feeling indeed. I soon forgot my trepidation. A wind began to pick up a feisty speed as it howled through the trees, crashing against the boughs, so they shuddered and shook, brushing against my face with an impertinence rather like people rushing to overtake you in the subway very briskly. And that was when I saw it in the middle of the woods, a wooden shack in remarkably good condition. But my bet is it had been built a long time ago, long before Stanhope Hall ever came into being. But over the years the wood had been treated so it had not degraded or succumbed to termites, mould or rot. There was a lock outside the door, and I opened it rather easily, peering inside. There were piles and piles of very dry firewood in this place, and I could smell all the dust, and observe the large silvery cobwebs that laced themselves between the wood. I closed the door behind me and continued upon my way, not knowing that this unlikely shack would play a quintessential role in saving my life. All of a sudden I could swear the forest had got significantly darker, but this area was dense with shade and undergrowth, so not even a glimmer of light ever appeared to trespass through the boughs of the trees. In a trice, the bird's song that had entertained and delighted my ears with its pretty trills was expunged, and all went horribly silent, so still that there were goosebumps that broke out like chicken pox all over my body, as I got an overwhelming feeling that I was not alone, and that something or someone was watching me. Worse still, the dogs stood on either side of me like tight-fitting bookends, and they both appeared to be growling. I could see their lips pulled back to expose their canine teeth, and I'd never observed them look so threatening before. Even the hair on their coats had radically doubled in size. That was when I heard a distinctly familiar voice. "Jennifer! Jennifer! It's me, Jennifer!" For a moment I held my breath, hardly daring to believe what I'd heard. That was my dead husband's very clear, distinctive voice. But he had died when he jumped off a tall bridge to his death. Had he faked his death all along? Was he really alive all this time? How had he managed to come all this way to Stanhope Hall? I know I should have remembered Sylvia's warning words about hearing Rosa's voice in the grove. I hasten to say that my husband's voice was so real, it took me completely off guard. I was not prepared for any of this. I was in no doubt I'd heard my husband's voice. Terry was very much alive. I didn't want anything more to do with my husband, but that part of me that had loved him once for a fleeting second forgot about all his indiscretions. I unflinchingly, without a wavering of hesitation, moved forwards, but one of the huskies stopped me in my tracks, threw me to my feet, so I fell back rather clumsily on the earthen floor. I believe the dog tried to stop me moving towards the voice, but I refused to be discouraged, so I climbed back to my feet, wiping the dirt off my pants, and ordering the two dogs to stay put. They obediently obliged me, but were far from happy. They continued to growl, for they sensed something was horribly wrong, but their canine warnings fell onto deaf ears. The dogs continued to growl. The hair on their bodies had practically doubled in size, but I ignored all their warnings. "Jennifer! It's me, Jennifer! Come here, Jennifer! I've missed you so much, my darling! I've missed you! Come here, Jennifer! I've missed you, my love!" I pushed rather obtrusively past the dogs, because they were trying to stop me going forwards into the grove. I was just so caught up under a trance, of which I had no control whatsoever, and which I am unable to explain all these years later, for it felt as if I had no control over my mind, and was being drawn towards the voice of my husband, imprisoned by its powerful persuasion, that held me hostage to its sweet but deadly allure. And that was when I saw the Wendigo. He was standing only feet away from me. I realized I had been duped, for this voice did not belong to my late husband. In truth, I felt as if I was staring into the eyes of the devil himself. Only these creatures' eyes were like hollow, empty sockets, devoid of any light, with darkness consuming their depths, with a glimmer of red light twinkling like a tiny pupil within each socket. The Wendigo continued to speak to me in my husband's voice, mockingly, taunting me. "It's good to see you, Jennifer. Why don't you come here, my love?" I was frozen to the spot, unable to move an inch, but my bladder burst its banks, and a warm liquid trickled down my legs. I was marooned in the thick, cloggy soup of my fear, like a desperate fly swimming for dear life in a bowl of French onion soup, for there was no way of escape from a creature like this. This could not be happening to me. It just couldn't. This thing could not be real. But even when I closed my eyes, ever so tightly, I could smell it. The creature stank of rancid, rotting, decomposing flesh, and of blood that had turned sour and sickly. There is no way on God's earth I can describe to you the smell. Only it is impossible to forget. The creature was built like a man, in size and stature, only taller, possibly about 7 foot or so. Its skeletal, emaciated form was grey, and this ugly pewter colour clung to the bony contours of its body so tightly that it was almost translucent, so you could clearly see the bones that lay beneath the skin, like sharp, gnarled roots. The creature was distinctly humanoid, with long, thin, willowy limbs and arms, and with incredibly long fingers and sharp claw-like nails. His legs ended in hooves. The face of the beast was like that of the skull of a deer. It had a human-like look to the face, but there were broad, hollow sockets and huge antlers above his head. The scariest thing of all was that human flesh covered in blood appeared to be drooling out of his jaws, and it was absolutely horrifying. I was in no doubt that what I was seeing was the Wendigo. The airy voice deepened in resonance, and the voice of my husband Terry was soon abandoned, and the creature began to speak my name, in the voices of people I knew and loved, some who were still present in my life, and others who were long since deceased. "Hello, Jennifer! Hello, Jennifer! Hello, Jennifer! Hello, Jennifer!" How could he even do that? Then in an unfamiliar, raspy voice, he soon became impatient with me. He let out a loud shriek. "Come here, Jennifer! Come here!" And that was when I heard another voice that screamed in my head. "Run, Jennifer, run! He's going to kill you! Run!" Where on earth did that voice come from? The next thing I knew, rocks went flying towards the trees, as if someone was aiming them directly at the Wendigo. But with my knees crumbling beneath me and the adrenaline pumping in my veins, I began to run as fast as I possibly could. But I was no match for the Wendigo. But as he ran after me, he let out a loud screech, as if something or someone had tripped him up. I turned around ever so briefly to see the Wendigo fighting something that I could not see. It was as if he was fighting something invisible. And then he was lifted off his feet, and he looked like a large sack of potatoes, as he was carried by this invisible entity towards the wooden shack, where all the firewood was stacked. He was thrown into the open door of the shack, and the locks were finally bolted behind him. The Wendigo was trapped. He was screaming to be let out. "Let me out! Let me out, Galanta! Let me out!" he screamed. And that was when I saw him. A Bigfoot flashed before my eyes, where moments before he had not been even visible. I realized he was able to cloak himself, so that there are times he can vanish before your very eyes, which might explain why so few people get to see them, for their cloaking powers have enabled them to remain unseen. This marvellous, lofty, benevolent creature, for which I felt no fear, had successfully thrown the Wendigo into the shack. I stopped running and boldly walked over to the Bigfoot. I knew this mystical beast had quite literally saved my life. How would I ever be able to thank him? You might have thought I felt a little like Alice in Wonderland on the yellow brick road, encountering things that I didn't even know existed in our reality. But I want to tell you, after seeing the Wendigo, the Bigfoot's presence seemed like a welcome relief, and incredibly normal to me. When you find yourself ensnared in an idiosyncratic, bizarre situation, then the outlandish things seem almost normal. The Bigfoot appeared human. Granted, he was easily 10 foot tall, built robustly like a powerful giant, covered in hair as white as snow, and whiter than both soldier and sapphire. He looked up at me through his soulful, dark, treacle-coloured eyes that were filled with a tender kindness. "Golotila, Hasan Shakwina, Loma Sila Kwina Sila, Hova Kilati, Hatwa Sakana, Ho Pashila Silako." My people always celebrate when we take down a Wendigo, but they have this nasty habit of slipping through your fingers like a slimy fish. You have no idea how long I've been wanting to do this, to destroy this evil entity. Kamikoloni hatta zaginakwa zolona silashi fakilakwa. These creatures are sometimes difficult to swat like a fly. They have their own unique cloaking system, but it's not as good as mine, he told me proudly. You're speaking to me in a strange language, I said to him. How is it that I understand every word? Why does that not happen when I listen to someone speaking French? The Bigfoot laughed. Kilatikwa sakishanakwi. When I talk to you telepathically, that's how I communicate. I send you the translation. I download it into your mind. I can do that to animals and birds alike. I understand the feelings and the heart of all living things. But that thing, he said, pointing to the shack containing the Wendigo, has been roaming our planet for millions of years. Karazan is a nasty, vindictive, vile beast that resides within our dimension and the next. This thing has no heart, for it is born of the underworld, where the spirits of the evil ones reside, for they are the rotten apples that do not have any place in this world. They must be cut off from accessing this realm, but some of them slip through the veil, and we try to send them back. The only way to do this is through fire. After seeing the Wendigo, the Bigfoot seemed like my hero, and I told him how thankful I was. He was so human, and both dogs came dashing over to him, smothering him with wet kisses. The Bigfoot stroked them and talked to them tenderly. I realized that he had a friendship with these dogs, as if he'd known them for a very long time. The Wendigo began pounding at the door of the shack, snarling and growling. At one point he tried to call me in my late husband's voice. Jennifer! Jennifer, my darling! Please come here. Please open the door, will you, sweetheart? Please, I don't want to be locked up in here. Please help me, Jennifer. The Bigfoot pointed at the shack. Such a trickster, he said to me. He's always manipulating people. I watched as the Bigfoot began to rub two sticks in his hands together, and I wondered what he was doing. The Bigfoot soon made fire with such an ease that it just blew my mind. He needed no matches or any special equipment, and before long the entire shack was engulfed in flames, as the Wendigo screamed and screamed, but I felt no pity for the malevolent beast. I sat next to the Bigfoot, as if he was an old friend of mine, and with the two dogs at our side we watched the shack burning down, as it was unmercifully engulfed in flames, and all that was left was a pile of dust. The Bigfoot let out a huge whooping sound, which I immediately emulated. Agilatikwa san shaka, woof! Alitalikwa, woof! A great evil has been vanquished, the Bigfoot told me. Dilatikwa si, this one has gone. Diloto masa, hilatikwa. The portal is now closed. He won't be able to come back again. Kulota Galanta, Kilashikakwa Hilaso. My name is Galanta. I'm well known in these parts, for I patrol the woods here. I'm sure I will be seeing you again. He slapped me on the back, then gave me a brief nod, and glided away. Indeed, I have seen him many more times over the years, when I lived with the Mackenzies, until I came out of hiding when my name was finally cleared. I'm glad to say my father-in-law made sure that everyone his son exploited got their money back. He was able to raise the funds to pay these people back, which was a huge blessing. 2 years after I moved to Stanipur, Theodore was gunned down in a drugs raid, so thankfully Sylvia was free. But I spent a few fabulous years at Stanipur with her, and grew to love her as if she was my very own grandmother. So there you are, that's my story. And for the doubters out there, the Wendigo is real. Wow, I don't know what to say. Wasn't that the most magnificent story? My word. Talk about two women coming together from different generations who are both ballet dancers, and they bring each other comfort because both of them have in some way been falsely accused of something that they didn't do. And this woman is warned all about the Wendigo, and she's very doubtful about it. And it seems like the Wendigo is a carnivorous, malevolent, evil spirit that somehow seeps into the portal of our world, and the Bigfoot was able to make it return to whence it came from. And clearly it's carnivorous, and if it feeds on you, basically if you are a person who is in a very bad place in your life, and it will smell your desperation, it will smell your hopelessness. What an extraordinary story. I don't know about you, but I really loved that. It was so heart-moving. Until next time, goodbye, good night.